This was Attestan Spielhaus in 1972. He was an innovator, an environmental scientist, a toy designer, and also the mind behind the experimental city. He was so fed up with what he called the planner's hopelessness approach to urban problems that he decided to design his own city and campaign to make it built. Since 1970s, planners have experimented with new technologies, new ways of understanding urban problems, and new ways of dealing with complexity of urban problems. But one thing has remained the same, and that's the image of urban planners, urban officials, and policymakers as unimaginative, non-creative, and inflexible. I'm an urban planner, and we need to talk about this. Hello, I'm Mujan, and this is the very first episode of Sail on a Beach podcast. It's finally out there. I'm super excited about it. As some of you might already know, I decided to start this podcast series to really try to find an answer to one seemingly very easy to answer question. And that's, what is creativity in urban planning? What does it mean to be a creative urban planner? Everybody seems to agree that we need to think differently about our living environments, that we need to think creatively about the future of our cities and the way we plan them. But few people can pinpoint what is it exactly that they want to see in a new process, a new technology, or a new idea to go, this is creative. Some of you might say, oh, haven't we already figured this out? We have for years talked about innovation management in cities. We have all these innovation frameworks. We have set up urban living labs as these collaborative, experimental, and creative spaces of problem solving in cities. So what's wrong with them? Haven't they already given us enough infrastructure for us to be creative in planning our cities? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, we have achieved a lot through these experimental practices. We have new solutions, we have new platforms, but also we are hearing more and more from urban planners and policymakers on how difficult it is for them to really incorporate these new ideas into their everyday workflow or practices. And it's very easy to go with the dominant narrative that, yes, it's just planners or our public sector, that there are all these tried and tested solutions out there, that planners are too slow in adopting, or they're too unsure about introducing change to their workflow, or at best that it's not them, but it's the inflexible institutional design of our public sector that is to blame for the lack of adoption of these new ideas. This narrative made sense to me for a long time. When I was doing my PhD, I was on the same board with everyone else criticizing urban planners, mainly for the lack of interest in anything beyond planning. I was working on use and design of games for participatory planning practices, and I was exposed to all these new storytelling techniques and how you tell a story and how you visualize your story and how you design for your user to interact with your story, and it was all fascinating. I looked into whatever was there in planning, in decision support systems and participatory tools, and I could see a huge difference between what was happening within the field and what was out there in game design and art. And this was quite frustrating. I remember when I attended UK Ireland Planning Research Conference and I prepared my slides, I had one slide titled, "Why do we need games in planning?" And my first bullet point was, because urban planners are boring. Not that planning is boring, but urban planners are boring. And that's how I felt back then. Because every time I talk with them about my project, they all go, yes, it's cool, but how costly it is, how practical this is. Why this one? Why not the other one? Why not the other tools? Like how different this game would be to other games we have. But then I found myself on a completely different side of the story when I joined a human-computer interaction design lab just after my PhD. There I was working with a lot of designers and computer scientists, and they all had these amazing visions about how societies should work and what role planners should have and how communities should deal with their problems and whose power we should diminish. who we should support more. So it was all these solutions based on whatever they thought it's the urban problem or whatever they thought the urban phenomena should be or how it should function. It was very easy for me to go, wow, this is such a great idea. It's creative, it's out there. I've never seen such a thing before. I never thought about the problem in this way. But going from this is a very cool idea to this is a useful piece of work for planning, or this is something that I will go and pitch for planners, was a huge leap. Even I, as an urban planner that was trained in planning for years before that, I found it really hard to decide how I'm going to do such evaluation, how I'm going to decide whether this piece of work or this piece of technology is useful for a planner. Which planner am I going with? What narrative in planning am I going for in this evaluation? Till then, for me, it was very systematic. It was like, okay, it's very easy to go about this evaluation. It's a very systematic process. You have a goal in mind. You have a process set to reach that goal. You're already using some sort of tools within your process, and you know already some limitation of the tools or process you have. So you already know where the problems are. And then there are all these amazing solutions out there, and you can kind of see their functionalities and their features and decide which of these solutions would fit your process. For me, it was very, very logical, systematic way of doing this evaluation. But when I saw the behind the scene of these designs, and you work with designers, and suddenly you realize it's not just one piece of technology or one piece of solution, that all these solutions have a bigger picture behind them. And you are exposed to that bigger picture in a varying degree in different projects. Some designers are more aware of that bigger picture themselves and they communicate that with you, or sometimes you just take the solution as it is and you never even question what was the narrative behind it. But then you realize that it's not anymore like pieces of puzzles that you just put together and fix your process with or perfect your process with. That sometimes you're just working on completely different puzzles and you're hoping that somehow these different puzzles, some pieces would match together or somehow they complement each other in some way. And I then realized that this is where the boring planner is born. I became the boring planner in that lab, to my own surprise. I wholeheartedly defended planning and its rigid ways of evaluating impacts and strategic thinking and long-term planning in face of these new solutions that I was exposed to. And it was very hard for me even to say, what am I standing for in these types of situations? What narrative about planning am I more comfortable with? Is my narrative about planning consistent in these different projects? In one, I go for, yes, planning in this project is about mediation. And the other one is like, no, it's a very rational way of analyzing data and predicting future and preparing for the future scenarios. And the other one was like, no, it's just participatory planning. And how am I deciding that for each project, which type of planning am I going for? And am I comfortable with that? Am I comfortable with such inconsistencies between how I see planning in these different projects and in these different collaborations? And how would I react to the solution as well? I know the world that this specific designer has in mind when providing this solution. But then I could see other projects and I see, okay, they pitch for different other solutions and other words that are completely different with what they're presenting now. Am I going with their previous solutions and put them together, or am I judging this based on only solution that I have in this project and what I'm being offered? So all I'm saying is it was a very complex task. There was so much individuality involved in it. It was so much personality and emotions, and wishes involved in it that I never saw being acknowledged in planning. I was always told that these are very systematic processes and there are all these ways and diamond-shaped frameworks, and you talk with others and you have all these ideas and then you reach consensus on this is the solution and here it is, you go and implement it. But being engaged in this collaboration, it was quite an experience in reflecting on your own perception of your own field and how you deal with your own profession and how you position yourself in these collaborations. And as much as we try to pretend that these collaborations go very smoothly and seamlessly, they're not. There are a lot of contradictions in these collaborations that people either never talk about or for the sake of project or, I don't know, next funding or saying that this was a great success, they kind of brush them off. But these are very influential things when it comes to evaluating creativity and new ideas in planning and how planners go about implementing these ideas. I'm lucky that I managed to secure funding from European Commission to really explore this topic in detail. And honestly, to answer questions I had all these years about my own work, about works in space of creative urban planning and creative solutions for urban planning. I'm working with a great team at University of Twente. I'm working with Johannes Flake, and also we are collaborating with Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. I'm working with Bahadur Bahromi at Crowd Cognition Lab there. I know that I'm dealing with a lot of complex and controversial topics in this project, that nature of planning itself is quite a controversial one. Everybody has some ideas about what planning is and what it should do in society. Creativity itself is quite complex and there's a lot of narratives around it. People define it differently. So I thought that just sticking with the academic outputs won't really do this topic a justice and won't really show the journey I took from get-go and deciding on what narrative I'm going for and show how it evolves over time. So I decided to start this podcast and really to take you with me on this journey to show how subjective and individual these choices can be, even within a certain academic project. And also it's my very first time interacting with fields like social cognitive psychology, and I think it would be an interesting one just to see how I as an urban planner would perceive their work and how these common languages can be created or what sorts of barriers are there in understanding what other fields are actually working on. So in terms of content, this is what it's going to be about. And in terms of format, it would be a lot of videos, me talking and updating you on things that I find interesting or things that I found surprising on a way. I will talk about things that I decide on in terms of conceptual framing or how I'm going to go about these different topics. And I will update you as much as I can on how it's changing during the project. I will have also some interviews with people who I work with, and I know they have very interesting take on planning. Their journey within planning field is quite interesting. I think we always have this image of this is the way planners are working or this is the way people end up in planning. But like looking at these different journeys, I think would give you a better idea of what planning is all about really in practice, rather than these structures that you see from outside of planning. That's it. Hope to see you next time. Next time I'm going to talk about why do we need to talk about disciplines if we are really pitching for interdisciplinarity in our research, and why I'm focusing on planners' view on creativity rather than creativity in planning and urban issues in general.